This lens over here is the Sigma 70 to 300mm f4 to 5.6 DL Macro Super. This copy, which I believe forms part of Sigma's legacy zoom collection, was made for the Pentax mount. There are about 13 different versions of this lens, and I believe that my one in particular is one of the older ones due to the fact that you can only use it at its so-called macro capabilities at 300mm. With the newer versions, you can use the macro capabilities from 200 to 300mm. Based on my lens's plastic build and the general appearance, I believe, or I guess, that mine was manufactured sometime around maybe the late mid-1990s to early 2000s, or maybe even earlier than that. I'm going to rate this lens at moderately high, despite the fact that I didn't love my overall shooting experience with this lens. The reason that I still rate this lens is because I managed to capture some lovely images with it, despite my copy having either hazing or lens separation at the back element. The main reason though that I didn't love shooting with this lens was because the focus was stiff, so getting critical focus was quite difficult. I'd either just miss it or nail it, one of the two. Even when you are nailing it, it's not, I wouldn't call this a sharp lens, though you can achieve some good detail. I don't think this is a sharp lens. So when set to 300mm with macro turned on and on manual focus, it was a lot of hit and miss. Furthermore, a lot of my images, whether it's due to the rear lens condition or due to the wide open aperture or the two factors together, a significant amount of my images came out somewhat hazy, and I'd say that they were unpleasantly soft in brightly lit environments. Having said that, a decent amount of my shots came out quite nice, so I'd rate this lens as being overall somewhat useful. So I'm going to briefly talk through some of the features of this lens, share some footage of me opening it up and trying to clean it, and then I'll conclude this video once I've shared my favorite photos. My favorite photos that I was able to get with this lens have to be of the ring neck parakeet, or rose-ringed parakeets. And of the parakeets, this image is my favorite. The haze that I mentioned has had an effect on the image, but I think I was able to get away with that. And though I feel there is enough detail captured of the parakeets, there's no doubt that with a less damaged optic or less damaged optics, we would have had images with greater detail. I love these parakeets and I can recognize their sounds pretty much anywhere that I go in London. Their earliest sightings were around 1893. They must have been brought in through docks over time, but various incidences of parakeet escapes must have happened, or maybe irresponsible liberations must have occurred through the decades. So they were everywhere, but their populations only started successfully expanding around 15 years or so ago, and some do fear that they will be the cause of some sort of avian apocalypse, but experts say it's too soon to tell. I didn't find myself interested in shooting the macro capability at 300mm, but for the sake of this video I went upstairs to take some photos this morning, and I'm not sure it's correct to call this a macro lens. There's a button that says macro, which you can switch at 300mm to get closer focus of up to 0.95 centimeters, but you can't actually get close to your subject. Or when I say close, I mean close to the point where you expect to be able to get with a more traditional or more modern macro lens. I don't know what I'm saying, but you know what I mean. You feel that when something says macro, you expect to get even closer than 0.95 centimeters. If I'm not mistaken, the macro ratio is 1:2. And I would say that at its tightest setting, you can capture decent details despite all the negative things I said a few seconds ago. But I'd say that in the correct conditions, you can achieve imagery with vivid colors, even at close-up. But it's a lot of hit and miss, and even the parts of the images that are in focus, as I mentioned, they're not sharp. All photos that you are seeing are handheld unless otherwise stated, and I'm going to just walk you through some photos. Let's go to Lightroom. So I got this lens about 2 years ago at a market, and it was attached to a Pentax MZ. The MZ I realized was broken, but the lens attached to it, this lens, was in working condition in that the aperture was working, and I felt that I might be able to get some shots even though the back element was a bit hazy. So I bought it for about £10 and took it out for a spin, and one of the first places that I took it to was the botanical gardens. Weird cacti, and I had no clear plan. But I just wanted to get a feel for the lens, and as I mentioned, the crunchiness of it when trying to focus, and I think that's because it was just old. I think there was sand in there. It made for a bit of a difficult shooting experience, especially wide open. But I still had fun. This one over here is at a weird place in Cape Town, which I drove past during a road trip. The Cob of Corn, a lot of strange metal art, and if you chose to see it as such, it was relatively creepy. This particular day was my first day out shooting film photography, but I packed this lens in with my Lumix S5 just in case, and I'm glad I did. Some of these photos are quite cool. This is Jacobus. He was one of the car guards when I was taking photos of this weird scrapyard place, and I asked him and his colleague Mishek if I could take their photos. I didn't want to waste their time too much, so I didn't ask them to move their positions relative to the sun, but I think it would have been quite cool if I just changed their positions ever so slightly. But this photo of Mishek converted to black and white came out quite nicely in a dramatic sense. This over here is what our swimming pool used to look like. Alien life forms in there, I'm telling you. I'm pleased to say the pool is now blue. And then when I came back to London, I took the lens out for a spin at a nearby park, Vauxhall Park, back when we lived there. Squirrel. Still undecided about this one. I'm not sure if I'll use it for anything beyond this video. Testing out the macro. When you can isolate a subject on its own with a far distant background, it is quite pleasing to the eye. Would this be an abstract shot? This didn't quite come out the way that I wanted, but close enough. I think I want to work on abstract photography in the future. I think it would force you to really think in a different way other than, a portrait, is a portrait, but abstract, you see the world, or you can learn to see the world slightly differently. So I have been doing that, but I think I'm gonna go out and do that more intentionally in the future. Fox. This is downstairs. Our neighbors have a fox, and there's sort of like no man's land between two of our neighbors. Their walls are close to each other, but there's a little space between the two walls, and the foxes live there. So you hear them every night. The first time I heard them, I had no idea what I was hearing, but I was later informed that it's foxes. And you'd think that with a lens of 70mm to 300mm, I would have gone out and taken even more portraits. But I didn't feel the desire to capture portraits or to make portraits with this lens. I took a quick photo of Julia she was doing some admin on a computer while cooking. And the lighting was good, so I captured that quickly. This is a zoom in of that. So as you can see, it's detailed, and it would be a decent lens for portraits. With regard to some of the video that I tried to capture with this, I needed a tripod, obviously, and I took some video from outside our room here of a pigeon, and as you can see, you can capture some detail, but it's not the greatest. There's haze and there's stuff, and I'm also now just looked at the screen, I realized that the sunlight is gone. I should have used a normal light for this, but so I guess my face has gone a little purple unless I've color corrected this. My overall thoughts on this lens are, I was supposed to put in some footage of me actually opening this up. I opened it up at the back, and I got a bunch of the haze off of the back element, but after cleaning it, I realized that it's probably lens separation that's the issue, and there's nothing that I can do about that. So I put it back on and took some photos, and those are some of the photos that you've been seeing. The parakeets were taken before I cleaned it up, and even after cleaning it up, it's still quite hazy. Overall, my opinions of this lens are that if you can get it for a cheap price, it's worth adapting to your mirrorless camera. It's a fun lens, especially if you can get one that isn't as crunchy as mine. I'm not overall wowed by this lens, but it did get me into the mind space of wanting to get a telephoto autofocus lens. That would be pretty cool, to be able to snap a bird and the camera can just focus on the bird, and so I don't have to worry about focusing. But overall, I am somewhat satisfied with these photos, somewhat satisfied with this lens, but I think I'm going to put it into retirement and play with some of my other vintage lenses that I have. Check this one here. This is a Nikon 50mm f2. I've got an f1.4 as well. I've been taking this one out quite a lot. And the f1.4 has been living on my Nikon f2. I'd like to thank Henry for your very kind support on Buy Me a Coffee. It was a really cool email to wake up to, so thank you very much. I do appreciate it. I hope that this video was as short as I was planning for it to be. I sometimes get a bit blabbery and then I don't stick to whatever script I had in my head and on the screen over here. So I hope it was not too long, and I hope that some of the images were somewhat satisfactory to you. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here, folks. I do appreciate it. Don't forget to keep taking photos, keep making videos, take care of yourselves, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers! And if you're interested in one of my more recent film camera purchases, check out the video that I've got on the screen now. The new addition to my camera collection, my 2 Rolleiflexes.